Hey everyone, Grant K for the Flame Learning channel. In part 4 of Active Color Management in Flame 2017 Extension 1, we learned all about the viewing rules and how to set them up correctly to display all sorts of media in the viewports. Now, since we've covered most of the features relevant to Active Color Management, the next few videos will demonstrate a variety of color-managed workflows. In part 5, we'll recreate the simple linear workflow. This workflow mimics other applications that use a linear workflow by only applying degamma and regamma operations. Please be advised that even though this may be considered common practice, it is not technically accurate in terms of the color science when you are working with camera raw, log, or EXR sources which typically have values well above 1. A more appropriate linear workflow would be to use the ACES workflow, which is covered in the next video. Now, we have already provided a color policy preset for the simple linear workflow, so you don't have to make your own. Just ensure that when you set up your project, you choose the simple linear workflow from the color policy presets. Create your project and launch Flame. Now, very briefly in the color management preferences, I want to point out the following. The project working color space and the action color space are set to Scene Linear Rec. 709 sRGB. So the default configuration for all settings in this project is Scene Linear Rec. 709 sRGB. In terms of the input rules, the color policy comes standard with a generic Rec. 709 rule, a DPX rule which tags DPX files as log, and an OpenEXR rule which tags the media as Scene Linear. My OpenEXR renders are Scene Linear, so we'll be using this rule. And the default rule would tag everything else as sRGB. Now, I'm using ProRes QuickTime Media, which is Rec. 709. However, the input rules included with this color policy are not aware of this, so my media would be tagged as sRGB. Typically, you would need to add rules to describe the media you work with. So I've already created an extra rule for the ProRes media. Any ProRes media with a MOV extension and containing MIV in the file name will be tagged as Rec. 709. As mentioned in the previous video, creating input rules is not mandatory because you can manually tag media on import, but this will automate the whole process for us. Now, if you switch over to the viewing rules, you have a standard set of viewing transforms specifically geared to the simple linear workflow. I want to point out the linear gamma corrected, the linear low contrast, and video colorimetric viewing transforms. You use these mostly in this color managed workflow. No extra viewing rules need to be added. Now, you should start by setting the broadcast and graphics monitor settings to match how your displays are calibrated, since this now plays a critical role in the 2017 Extension 1 color management. In previous releases, it was necessary to pick a specific gamma correction value, for example, an sRGB gamma, that would be matched to whatever display you were using. However, with the various Mac displays, wide gamut, and HDR monitors, that was becoming impractical. So in the new approach, you set your preferences for your display hardware, and the linear gamma corrected viewing transform will simply apply the inverse of that. So if you start a project on a Mac laptop, and then continue it in an office on a very different monitor, you can still use the linear gamma corrected view and it should look the same. Likewise, you can use it on both your graphics and broadcast monitors, even if the hardware has different gammas, and they should match. The video colorimetric viewing transform is similar. It will look at whatever video color space your media is tagged with, and convert it to have the matching colorimetry on your specified hardware. This is the same way the Adobe apps work, so this approach will also allow you to have better Photoshop to Flame workflow. The linear low contrast viewing transform is just for diagnostic purposes to show you what's in the highlights and shadows. But you could also use the interactive contrast control or the Control-Shift keyboard shortcuts for that purpose as well. Now close the preferences and let's import the media via the Media Hub. In my root folder, I have a few directories. There is ARRILogC Media, ARRIRAW Media, DPX Media, OpenEXR Media, ProRes Media, and Red Media. In this simple scene linear workflow, we are going to import ProRes Rec 709 as well as OpenEXR Scene Linear CGI. Regardless of what media I am importing, ultimately I want everything as Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB. So ensure the color management mode is set to auto-convert. The input color space is set from File or Rules, and the working space is from Project. Now, since the input rules and the working color space are already configured as you saw earlier, this will automate the process for all my media. So when we go to the ProRes directory, the media is tagged as Rec 709, and then auto-converted to Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB. If you want to verify this, just look at the color metadata settings in the preview window. I'll drag one of these clips into the media panel. Finally, if we go to the OpenEXR directory, I have a few CGI renders that were produced using a Scene Linear color space. As per the input rules, the media is tagged as Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB, and any associated alphas are tagged as mattes. So no conversions will be applied to this media. Now, as a reminder, the simple linear workflow with its simple D-gamma style viewing transforms is better suited to working with media originating from Rec 709. Working with other color spaces, such as log or even raw formats, should be done using a more sophisticated viewing transform, such as the ACES output transforms, the Alexa rendering, or a 3D LUT designed for a particular log color space. However, some people prefer not to use a LUT at all, and just grade the log material until it looks good on their monitor. To use that approach in the context of this policy, you could simply tag your log media as Rec 709 video, since the intent is that once it's graded, it will look good on that display without any LUT. Now, moving on from importing, when we look at the media in batch, everything should be in Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB color space, except for any mattes or alphas. No extra preparation tasks should be required. If you need to convert between different color spaces, either use the clip's pre-processing settings to change the color space at the media level, or use the color management node to change the color space at the flow graph level. Now, looking at any of these clips in the viewer, they should all be displayed through a Scene Linear transform. I have the gamma corrected version selected. If I click bypass or hit Shift-Alt-tilde, it turns off the viewport color management, and I can see the raw media, which looks dark and contrasty as expected, since it is in a Scene Linear color space. And as I mentioned earlier, the matte or alpha clip is raw data, and that is viewed with a matte setting on the viewport. Now, coming back to the batch schematic, nodes with an image type menu are now automatically configured. For example, if I go back to the batch node bin and drag out a Kia RGB node, when we look at its menus, the image type is set to auto. So when you connect an input into this tool, it will read the tagged color space and automatically set the image type to either Scene Linear or Other. So you should not have to tell these nodes what mode to work in. It can be done for you. In the case of the simple Scene Linear workflow, obviously the tool will choose Scene Linear from this tagged input. Now you can build your flow graph with any of the nodes. But I want to focus on the Action node because the 3D Compositor is also now applying color management. So I'll go to the Custom Node bin and drag out a pre-made Action node to save time. Now there is no difference in the way you connect your media within the color managed environment. What you do need to be aware of is that Action is now expecting media in the Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB color space. You can tell this by reading the node description. Action's default color space is initially set out in the color policy, and you can alter the default settings in the color management preferences. But if you go into the Action node preferences, you can access the current color management setting for this node, and you can alter the color space if required. Now, if you changed the setting from user-defined to same as back, if you fed a background input into Action with a different color space, similar to handling resolution, Action will switch to the background color space. Now let's look at the result view of the Action node. In the viewport, Action is showing the media through a linear gamma-corrected viewing transform, expecting an input from the Action working space. So all the media coming into Action must be in the matching color space, otherwise the color will look wrong in this view. Very importantly, I need to reiterate, Action is not performing any color space conversions to layers coming in from batch or the timeline. It is simply expecting all the media in the appropriate color space. So you should auto-convert your media to the working color space before bringing it into Action. However, when you use the Action import node, you will have the same options as in Media Hub to auto-convert into the Action working space. Secondly, all internal generators will match the Action color space. So lens flare textures, substance and substance PBR will all be generated in Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB color space in this case. Ultimately, you're looking at a combination of different media from a variety of sources, all converted into Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB and composited together. As a side note, you could use the simple Scene Linear workflow for PBR compositing. However, the issue with this workflow is that the simplistic gamma viewing transform actually clips everything above 1.0, so your results may not be as pleasing as you expect. Now there are loads of other videos showing compositing in action, so let's move on to the next stage once the flow graph is completed. I'm referring to rendering. Back in the batch schematic, if you just wanted to render out your results in the same Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB color space, just add a render node or write node to the end of the flow graph. As with a few other nodes in batch, your output nodes will also show the color space in the node description. So you can maintain a consistent color space throughout the entire batch flow graph. But if you want to change the color space during the render, you can do it in a number of ways. The first method is to go back to the batch node bin and locate the color management node. Drag out the node and add it before the output node in the flow graph. Double-click the node for its controls and switch to the 2-up view with Alt-2. Set the left viewport to front with F1 and the right viewport to result with F4. Ensure the result view is selected. So you have your input and output in the viewports. Note that the viewing transform is identical in both viewports. Now in the Mode pull-down menu, you have a load of options for doing color space conversions. Firstly, if you want to convert scene linear or log media into a video color space for delivery, select the Viewing Transform option. This mode takes the viewing transform and bakes it as part of the render output. In other words, if you've been viewing the Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB result through a Rec 709 display, you can tell Flame to take what you see in the viewport and create a Rec 709 output. It's basically the what you see is what you get approach. I see this in the viewport, it's what I want, please give me the output with an appropriate color space. So I will set the tagged color space as from source, the display to Rec 709 video, and the view transform to linear gamma corrected to emulate how I've been working. So this will give you a Rec 709 deliverable. I also want to highlight the input transform options as an alternative conversion tool. For starters, it is identical to what we used when importing the media. So when outputting, you should use the input transform tool if you want to invert the transform you applied when you imported the media in order to deliver a comp in the original color space. You could also use it to convert from a working space to a similar space, such as Scene Linear Rec 709 to ACES, or Rec 709 Video to Rec 2020 Video. For example, if you want to output this composite as ACES, you could click Invert. Set your working space to Scene Linear Rec 709. Next, select ACES 2065-1 from the Input Space menu. The viewports both look the same, but if you click Bypass, you will see that the media has been converted. So remember that the View Transform is the recommended tool to create video deliverables, and Input Transform is the appropriate tool to get back to an original color space or convert between similar color spaces. So these are just some of the modes to perform color space conversions when you need them. Now the other way to do a color space conversion on output without a color management node is just to use the color management tools that are built directly into the output nodes. Just by enabling these menus will give you the same functionality as you have seen before. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, the simple scene linear workflow is considered commonplace because of its wide use with other compositing applications. It's a sufficient workflow if you're compositing Rec 709, log, and scene linear materials, and it should match the other compositing applications. Now, I'm not questioning the final look, but in terms of the color science, this workflow is considered technically inaccurate. If you want a simple way to achieve a final look that is color science accurate, you should be using the ACES 1.0 color management. ACES is typically orientated towards materials originating from film or camera raw, and is more sophisticated to handle multiple color spaces, including the HDR varieties. However, if you are primarily working with video sources and a bit of CG, the simple linear workflow is a good starting point. Note that you can use this policy even if you are primarily using Rec 709 Video as your working space and importing most of your media as tag only. This is fine for just doing the occasional degamma into linear for certain shots. So in part 6 of Active Color Management in Flame 2017 Extension 1, we rewind back to the beginning to go through an ACES color managed workflow and look at combining Arilog C material with ACES CG EXR renders. Comments, feedback, and suggestions are always welcome and appreciated. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the Flame Learning channel for future videos.